I was just reviewing delivery confirmation emails when the notification from my security system appeared on my phone. Emotion alert, timestamp 2:30 p.m., from the cold storage unit attached to my catering kitchen. I clicked it expecting to see a delivery driver or perhaps my assistant, Maya, rearranging inventory after the morning's shipment. What I saw instead made the phone slip from my fingers and clatter across the marble countertop, and for a full 10 seconds I stood perfectly still, staring at footage that was in the quiet process of dismantling every assumption I had built my life upon. It was my mother-in-law, Brenda, standing inside my refrigerated storage room, methodically filling reusable canvas grocery bags with my Wagyu beef, not a steak or two, not one package she might explain away as a borrowed item she forgot to mention. She was moving with the calm, deliberate efficiency of someone who had planned this. Bag after bag, her hands in latex gloves, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air as she reached to the back of the shelving unit where I kept the premium cuts. The A5 Japanese Wagyu, sourced directly from a supplier in Kagoshima through a contact it had taken me 2 full years to develop, was disappearing into those canvas bags in real time. $4,200 worth of the most critical ingredient in the most important catering contract I had ever signed. And visible at the very edge of the camera frame, half swallowed by the shadow of the corridor outside the storage room door, was a silhouette I had shared a bed with for 5 years. My husband, Jason, standing, watching, not stopping her, just watching. I had built my catering business from nothing, and I say that not for sentiment but for context, because what was in those bags was not merely expensive protein. It was the physical embodiment of 6 years of relentless, unglamorous work. When Jason and I married, I was employed at a corporate event planning firm, managing other people's visions for a salary that barely covered rent on the 2-bedroom apartment we shared in the eastern part of the city. I had savings, drive, and a notebook full of menu concepts I sketched during lunch breaks, and a deep bone-level conviction that I was capable of building something real. Jason had believed in that back then. He had sat across from me at our tiny kitchen table on a Friday night, the notebook open between us, and told me that he thought I could do it, that he would support me, that we were a team. Clara and Company. That was what I named the business, my name in elegant script on pale ivory cards, because I wanted it to feel intimate and personal, the way a truly good meal always does. The first 3 years were lean and exhausting in ways I had not anticipated. I catered small birthday parties, office lunches, and one disastrous wedding where the refrigeration unit failed at 11 o'clock at night, and I improvised a cold menu from scratch while pretending to every guest that everything was proceeding exactly as intended. I cried in my car after that one, with the engine running and my forehead against the steering wheel, and then I drove home and updated my contingency checklist and went to sleep and got up the next morning and kept going. By year 4, the business had turned a real profit. By year 5, I had a team, Maya as my kitchen assistant, a part-time driver named Paul, and a bookkeeper named Diane who worked 2 mornings a week from her home, and who had, on more than one occasion, told me that the numbers looked genuinely good. We had a commercial kitchen in a converted warehouse building, with a dedicated cold storage unit I had installed specifically for high-value ingredients. Temperature-controlled, monitored by a security system I had researched thoroughly and chosen for its remote video access feature. I had paid for that system myself out of the business account on a Tuesday afternoon the previous spring because I believed in protecting the things you had worked to build. The irony of that belief was not lost on me. Standing at my desk at 4 in the afternoon with a cold cup of tea and a security alert I had not watched for 3.5 hours. My house, our house, was a 10-minute drive from the kitchen. A Victorian terrace with high ceilings and original fireplaces, which I had purchased 4 years ago using my savings, a business loan, and a down payment funded entirely from my own income. Jason was a graphic designer, talented and intermittently in demand. There were good months and then months where the work thinned and he contributed less to the household expenses. And I had never made an issue of it because I did not believe a partnership should function like a ledger. The house was mine in every practical sense. My credit, my loan, my name first on the deed. But I had always thought of it as ours. That generosity of framing, I would later come to understand, had been received not as love, but as leverage. Brenda had never truly liked me, and I want to be precise about that because there is a version of this story I could tell in which I sound like a difficult daughter-in-law projecting hostility onto a woman who simply had a different communication style. That version would be dishonest. Brenda's dislike of me was specific and legible from our very first meeting, when she looked at the apartment Jason and I shared. The one with good light and a kitchen I had repainted myself over a long weekend with careful strokes of a warm ivory, and said, without warmth, "It's very small, isn't it?" Not a question, an assessment. The opening position in a negotiation I had not yet realized I was entering. She lived 40 minutes away in a house that had belonged to her late second husband, Gerald, who had died 3 years before I met Jason and left her the property outright. Beyond the house and a modest pension, Brenda had no independent income. She relied on Jason for supplementary support, irregular contributions to her utilities, her car maintenance, a standing monthly transfer that Jason had mentioned to me once and then filed away in the silence between us, as though speaking of it further might invite a scrutiny he preferred to avoid. I had not scrutinized it. I had told myself it was none of my business, that a grown man supporting his widowed mother was a virtue rather than a vulnerability. I had been wrong about what the money represented and wrong about what the silence around it meant, and I would spend a long time afterward rearranging these facts into a shape that made any sense at all. The signs had been there. They are always there. And the particular cruelty of hindsight is the way it transforms every overlooked detail into a quiet accusation directed at your own judgment. Looking back from the wreckage of that Tuesday afternoon, I could identify at least 3 moments in the preceding weeks that should have stopped me cold, should have prompted me to change the building access codes and sit Jason down at the kitchen table and say, "Tell me what is happening." I had not done any of those things, because I had been busy and trusting and, I think, genuinely afraid of what asking the question might confirm. The first sign had come at Brenda's Sunday dinner in late September, one of the monthly visits Jason maintained, and I attended with careful, steady effort. She had asked, over the antipasto, how the big event was going. She had learned about the VC dinner from Jason before I had the opportunity to frame it myself, a habit of his that mildly irritated me, but which I had long ago decided not to make into an issue. I had given her an update. 14 guests, a Japanese-inspired tasting menu, an estate venue in the countryside, the kind of client whose recommendation could meaningfully change the trajectory of a small business. She had listened with what I then read as genuine interest, nodding at the right moments, asking about the menu, the logistics. "And the main ingredient," she had said, refilling her wine glass without being asked, setting the bottle back down with a small, precise click. "The Japanese beef. That's very expensive, isn't it?" She said it with the conversational lightness of someone asking about a vacation they had read about once and found interesting. I told her yes. A 5 Wagyu from Kagoshima ran between $150 and $250 per pound for premium cuts, and that sourcing through my direct contact rather than a domestic distributor saved me significantly on a bulk order of this size. She had nodded slowly and said, "How clever," and then turned to Jason to ask about his freelance pipeline, and the conversation moved on. I had felt briefly that perhaps this was progress, that Brenda was making an effort to be genuinely interested in my life. I was wrong about that, too. The second sign had been subtler, something I noticed the way you notice any small wrongness you are not specifically tracking, with a brief flicker of unease that dissolved before it could solidify into a real question. the spare key to the kitchen building, the one I had given Jason nearly a year earlier so he could let himself in on evenings when he brought me dinner during late prep sessions, was no longer on the visible loop of his key ring where it had always lived. I mentioned it casually. He said it was probably in his desk drawer that he would find it. I nodded and returned to the vendor invoice on my screen. The key was not in his desk drawer. It was on his key ring, moved to a position behind his car key and his office storage key, where it was less immediately visible. A small, deliberate concealment. Proof not of accident, but of intention. The third sign was atmospheric. Harder to describe because it did not present itself as a single incident, but as a pattern of small adjustments in behavior, each individually explainable, collectively damning. In the 2 weeks before the video, Jason had started taking his phone to the bathroom when he showered, something he had never previously done. He had started ending calls on the front step before coming inside, finishing them in a lowered voice with a particular set to his shoulders. The posture of someone carrying something they do not want you to see. When I asked who he had been speaking to, he said, "Mum," with the unhurried evenness of someone who had rehearsed the answer so many times it had become texture rather than language. I had believed him, or I had let myself believe him, which serves the same function in a marriage, but is not remotely the same thing. The morning of that Tuesday in October had been unremarkable in the way that mornings are when a disaster is quietly assembling itself just beyond the edge of your awareness. I had woken at 6, made coffee with the French press Jason had bought me for my birthday, dark roast, ground fresh, the smell of it filling the kitchen like something warm and reliable, and sat at the dining table reviewing vendor invoices while Jason slept in. The morning light came through the east-facing windows in long gold rectangles across the oak floor, and Miso, our cat, arranged himself in one of them with the absolute proprietary satisfaction of a creature who had never once been asked to doubt the stability of his environment. I had a meeting with a florist at 10 to discuss table arrangements for the VC dinner. A call with my Kagoshima supplier at noon to confirm final aging protocols for the Wagyu. Everything was orderly and proceeding exactly as it should. I kissed Jason on the cheek before I left. He was half asleep, his hand finding my wrist briefly, his thumb pressing there for just a moment in what I took for affection, and drove to the kitchen in the kind of uncomplicated morning mood that only exists when you still believe in the world you are living in. The florist meeting went well. The supplier call went better. By mid-afternoon, I was at my office desk with a cold cup of tea and a half-eaten sandwich Maya had left on the corner of the desk, moving through the prep timeline for the VC dinner with the quiet, focused satisfaction of someone who has worked very hard and can finally see the shape of what that work is going to produce. It was in exactly this mood, unhurried, concentrated, almost content, that I picked up my phone to check messages and saw the security alert I had missed 3.5 hours earlier. Motion alert, cold storage unit, 2:30 p.m. I almost dismissed it. I thought, probably Maya, or the supplementary herb delivery I had been expecting since the previous afternoon. I tapped the notification. The video loaded in 3 seconds. The storage room's interior light was on, casting the space in its familiar blue-white fluorescence, and the shelving units were fully visible. My Wagyu was on the middle shelf to the left. Vacuum-sealed packages arranged precisely as I had stacked them on the day of delivery, labeled in my own handwriting with cut, weight, and receipt date. And Brenda was standing in front of them, partly turned away from the camera, but not completely. Her face visible in 3/4 profile whenever she reached for the next package. Latex gloves, 3 canvas bags on the floor beside her, already sagging with the weight of what she had taken. She did not rush. She did not pause with the nervous hesitation of someone doing something they were uncertain about. She worked with the methodical, unhurried calm of someone who had assessed the risk, decided it was acceptable, and was now simply completing a task she had planned carefully in advance. At the 39-second mark, she straightened, gathered two of the bags by their reinforced handles, and turned toward the door. And Jason stepped back out of the corridor, making room for her to pass. I set the phone face down on the desk. I put both palms flat on the surface. I breathed in for 4 counts and out for 4 counts, the way my therapist had once taught me during the hard early years of building the business. And for a moment, the breathing helped. For a moment, I was simply a woman sitting at a desk on an ordinary Tuesday in October, and the world was the world I had believed myself to be living in. Then I turned the phone back over. I watched the footage again, and then a third time. Each time I watched it, something new resolved itself from the image, the specific brand of those canvas bags, which told me she had brought them deliberately rather than grabbed whatever was at hand. The angle of Jason's silhouette remaining in the corridor for the entire 47 seconds, never once moving toward the room, never once opening his mouth. The almost imperceptible tilt of his head at the 38th second, a single small acknowledgement, one beat before Brenda began collecting the bags to leave, a nod, an understood signal between two people who had agreed on something I had not been invited into. I called Maya. I don't know why I called Maya first. She could not have known, had no part in any of it, and I would later feel a pang of guilt about loading her with information she had no context for. But she answered on the second ring with her usual brisk warmth, and the sound of a familiar voice made the fine, deep vibration in my chest briefly worse before it steadied. "Did anyone else have access to the cold storage today?" I asked, and I was quietly proud of how even my voice sounded, how ordinary the question appeared. Maya said no. She had been in the kitchen until 1 o'clock, then at a supplier across town through mid-afternoon, and the door had been locked when she left. She asked if something was wrong. I said there had been a security alert I was looking into, probably nothing, and thanked her and ended the call. Probably nothing. I had said probably nothing while the footage of my mother-in-law was still playing in my memory in a continuous, unhurried loop, gloved hands moving through vacuum-sealed packages with the calm of a woman who had decided that what belonged to me was available to her by right of some arrangement I had never been shown, never been consulted about, never been given the chance to refuse. My hands were not visibly shaking. There was only that fine internal vibration, starting in the tips of my fingers, moving up through my wrists and forearms, settling somewhere deep in my sternum, cold and steady, like a second heartbeat made entirely of ice. Outside my office window, the afternoon had gone the particular flat gray of an October sky preparing to rain. The kitchen building was quiet. The cold storage unit was somewhere down the corridor, temperature-controlled, monitored, locked, and emptied. 3 weeks before the most important dinner of my career, $4,200 that I could not recover in time by any conventional means, and a marriage that had just revealed, in 47 seconds of blue-white fluorescent footage, exactly what it had actually been built on. I sat very still for a long time, and then, slowly and with great deliberateness, I opened my laptop and typed 2 words into the search bar. Theft lawyer. Before I left my office that evening, I did 3 things in deliberate order. First, I backed up the security footage to my phone, personal cloud, and a private email account that existed in a quiet corner of my digital life, like a fire extinguisher I had installed and hoped never to need. Second, I printed the complete delivery record for the Wagyu, arrival date, weight, cut-by-cut breakdown, and stapled it to the original purchase receipt. Third, I found the business card I had carried in my wallet for 2 years, a solicitor named Philippa, whom I had met at a small business networking evening, and I dialed her number before I could talk myself out of it. She answered on the 4th ring, and I told her, in the most unemotional language I could manage, that I had 47 seconds of time-stamped footage showing a person unlawfully removing approximately $4,000 worth of inventory from my commercial cold storage, and that a second individual had been visibly complicit. A brief silence followed. the quality of silence belonging to someone recalibrating from routine to serious. Then she said, "Don't touch anything in that storage unit until I send someone to document its condition. Don't speak to either person until we've talked tomorrow, and don't let anyone know you have the footage yet." I said I understood. I drove home. Jason was on the sofa with his laptop open when I arrived, Miso asleep in the corner with his customary indifference to all human difficulty. The scene was so thoroughly ordinary that for one involuntary second, I felt the floor of my certainty shift. Some vestigial, hopeful part of my brain performing one last audit of the evidence, searching for an alternative explanation. Then Jason looked up, and I saw the fractional bracing in his face before it settled into its practiced neutrality. He had been waiting. Not necessarily for tonight, but for the shape this moment represented. He had known it was coming. I sat across from him and did not take off my coat. "Tell me about 2:30 this afternoon," I said. He blinked slowly. "I don't know what you mean." I held out my phone with the footage open. He watched all 47 seconds without looking away, and the color left his face, not dramatically, but slowly, like a tide retreating. When it ended, he looked somewhere above my left shoulder and pressed his lips together and said nothing. It was not the silence of someone wrongly accused. It was the silence of someone who had known this moment was inevitable and had not yet chosen which version of himself to present to it. "How long has she had a key to my building?" I said. He exhaled, a slow breath that bought time rather than delivered information. "She's been struggling financially. Since Gerald's estate was sorted, the pension doesn't cover everything, and I thought—" He stopped. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." "What was it supposed to be like?" I said. "What was the version where I just never found out?" He had no answer. The absence of it was its own complete and devastating response. I picked up my bag and drove to Brenda's house. She answered the door in a cream dressing gown and reading glasses with the composed expression of someone who had already assessed the odds of my arrival and chosen equanimity as her armor. The hallway behind her was warmly lit, and I could see her dining table clearly, and on it 2 canvas bags with reinforced handles sagging with the settled weight of refrigerated meat. She had not unpacked them, or she had repacked them. Either possibility told me the same thing about her intentions. "Brenda," I said, "I have the footage." Her expression did not change. That, more than anything else in that doorway, told me everything about how long she had been preparing for this conversation. She stepped back. "Why don't you come inside?" I stood in the center of the living room without sitting, and I watched her settle into the armchair with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who believes she is still directing the scene. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at me with something that was almost sorrow, almost concern, and was neither. "I think you're feeling very emotional right now, and I understand that," she said. "Before you say anything, you know I would never intentionally harm you or your business. We're family." I let the words sit in the room for a full 3 seconds. "The bag's on the table," I said. "Who are you selling it to?" The silence that followed was shorter and sharper than her previous ones. The silence of someone who had prepared for a different confrontation than this. Micro-expressions crossed her face in rapid sequence, widening, control, tightening around the mouth. "There's a restaurant contact," I said, and watched her face confirm it as the words formed. "Someone you called after I told you what the Wagyu was worth per kilogram. Someone who made you an offer. That's why the gloves. That's why the timing. You weren't taking it to use it. You were going to sell it." She said nothing, which was everything. The last of my uncertainty burned away cleanly, leaving only what was underneath, a cold, precise, entirely unsentimental clarity. Not hot anger. Something far more useful. "I need you to understand something," I said, in a register I had never quite used before, low, flat, and certain of itself. "I have the footage in 3 locations. I have complete purchase documentation. I have a solicitor already advising me, and I have a growing interest in understanding exactly how long this has been going on." I paused. "Shall I tell you what your face just told me about that question?" I left without waiting for her answer. I sat in the parked car outside our house for 15 minutes before going inside. Not to cry, because the crying was not ready yet and would not be for some time, but to confirm I was steady before re-entering the conversation I had left an hour earlier. Jason was still on the sofa. Whatever he saw in my face made him close his laptop without being asked. "How many times has she been in the building?" I said. "Since the first time." He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, dropped them. "Since January," he said. "Small amounts at first, the truffle oil, some of the Spanish charcuterie. I thought if I could get her stable, it wouldn't need to become—" He stopped himself again. "You handed your mother a key to my kitchen," I said. "You let her steal from my business for 9 months. You were in the corridor today, Jason. I watched you nod." The word sat between us like a stone dropped from a height. "You knew she was selling it. You chose her. Every month since January, over and over, you chose her. So please don't tell me you were keeping the peace. There was no peace. There was only my business being dismantled one shelf at a time while you managed the access schedule." He had nothing left. I walked to the bedroom and called Philippa. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Here's what we do." The plan was methodical and entirely within legal bounds. Police report the following morning with footage and inventory records as primary evidence. Cease and desist to Brenda by courier. Written statement from Jason documenting the full scope of access and every incident he could confirm. "If she's been selling through a third party," Philippa said, "the restaurant contact may be liable for receiving stolen goods. Depending on volume, there could be commercial fraud charges." She paused. "Will your husband cooperate?" I thought of Jason on the other side of the bedroom door. "He will," I said. "He has no other credible option." I was right about that. The investigation moved quickly, which Philippa said was unusual and which I attributed to the quality of the evidence. A security system with good remote access and an unambiguous timestamp is not a complicated adversary. The restaurant contact, Dominic, was identified and interviewed within the week. Faced with the footage and the transaction records Philippa assembled, he confirmed the arrangement and produced 6 months of payment records. The full financial scope of what Brenda had been running became clear. 19 separate transactions across 9 months, totaling just over $11,000. Not small amounts, not struggling, systematic. Jason provided his written statement. It was thorough and frank in a way that surprised me slightly, as though the one thing he still had to offer was honesty, and he intended to give it completely, as both penance and evidence. Brenda's solicitor proposed a private resolution within a week of the report. Philippa rejected it in language precise enough that there was no subsequent counterproposal. In the end, Brenda agreed to full restitution, documented market value of all items taken across 9 months, plus the premium I had absorbed on the emergency Wagyu replacement, sourced through a secondary contact in 3 frantic days, at a cost that made my accountant wince, and which the VC clients pronounced excellent. She did not go to prison. I had not wanted that. I had wanted the money, the record, and the end of it. She relocated to her sister's city before the first restitution payment cleared. Jason and I separated in November. We divided the practical elements of a shared life with a quiet efficiency that surprised us both, as though the relationship, having already done most of its structural failing in private, had nothing dramatic left to perform in public. He moved into a flat share across the city. I kept the house. I kept the business. I kept Miso, who adjusted to the new arrangement with the magnificent imperviousness to human suffering that has always been the cat's defining philosophical position. By January, Clara and Company had its best quarter on record. The VC referral had opened 2 new contracts. Maya received a raise, accepted with the unsentimental pragmatism of someone who had always known she deserved it. In March, I had the cold storage code changed, the building lock rekeyed, and a second camera installed in the corridor, angled specifically to capture anyone who might stand just outside the frame of the first. I sat at my office desk on a Tuesday afternoon in early spring, with the low, clear light coming through the window and the security monitor steady on its mount and a stack of new contracts beside my laptop, and I thought about the cost of learning the real value of what you have built, not in money and legal fees and emergency sourcing premiums, in the permanent recalibration of what you will and will not absorb in the name of keeping the peace. Peace purchased through silence is not peace. It is a deferred invoice, accumulating interest, arriving eventually in 47 seconds of blue-white fluorescent light. The French press was on the counter, dark roast, ground fresh. I made coffee and stood at the window in the early spring light, with Miso arranged on the sill beside me, his tail curled precisely over his paws, and the morning was cold and clear, and entirely mine. Some things, once taken, cannot be returned. Trust is one of them. Certain cuts of Japanese Wagyu are another. But the work, the early mornings and the late prep sessions, and the notebook full of ideas sketched during lunch breaks, that had always been mine alone. No one had handed me the key to that, and no one, it turned out, could take it without my knowing.